What if Anakin killed Palpatine instead of Dooku on the Invisible Hand? In the original timeline, Anakin takes the advice of the Dark Master, Palpatine, and executes Dooku, continuing his legacy of heroism in the Republic War effort. However, on one of our old videos, a viewer wondered what if instead Anakin had killed Palpatine. That's the story that we'll be exploring today. So, cuddle up in your Wampa hair blanket, grab a glass of my galaxy-renowned Bantha Brew, and let's hop right in to this tantalizing what-if scenario. Do you know what it takes to make videos like this? Our YouTube channel is a self-supported one, composed of a series of artists that work every day to bring you top quality content. Some of our videos take over 24 hours to develop, including script writing, narration, and editing. If you like our content and enjoy listening to our videos, you can help give us a little bit of support. For only $5 a month, you can become a Bantha Stew Patreon supporter, stay in touch with our latest projects, suggest changes, and even be featured in future videos. That will help our little channel stay funded and help us accomplish our dream of creating a successful YouTube channel. Now, without further delay, let's get into today's story. Our story begins on Grievous's flagship, the Invisible Hand, following Anakin's defeat of Dooku. Obi-Wan has been knocked unconscious, and Anakin stands facing Dooku with the twin blades at his throat, displaying how he had handily defeated the Dark Lord this time around. Indeed, it seemed that Anakin's powers had doubled, just like he said at the beginning of the match. Palpatine still goads on the young man, pressuring him to kill Dooku right there and right then, ending the Clone Wars for good. Anakin takes pause, saying that it isn't the Jedi way. However, in this moment, he also senses something dark about the Chancellor. The cloud of deceit that Palpatine had manufactured lifts for just a moment, and the Chosen One is able to glimpse the dingy recesses of Palpatine's soul. Perhaps it was a message from the Force, but Anakin knows in that instant that Palpatine is something far worse than he had ever dreamed. Once again, Anakin looks into Dooku's eyes, seeing the absolute fear that he felt. In that instant, Anakin makes a radical decision. He turns to Palpatine and tosses both lightsabers in his direction. Palpatine, who's embroiled in his hatred of Dooku and his ambition, doesn't sense Anakin's shifting emotions, and he is decapitated by the twin sabers handily. The blades return to Anakin's hands, and he cuffs Dooku, but on the legs, since Anakin had, just cut off his hands, demanding that he get up and stand trial. Dooku is shocked, but happy to be alive. He obliges, and Anakin also frees Obi-Wan before beginning their escape. How does this event butterfly to the rest of the timeline? Let's keep going and find out. In this timeline, Anakin, Obi-Wan, R2, and Dooku still end up being caught by Grievous. He takes him to the bridge, and Anakin still makes the snarky remark about how short the cyborg is. In this scenario, Grievous frees Dooku, and the hero of the Confederacy starts taunting his Jedi opposition. The battle still breaks out between the Jedi, the droids, and Grievous, who smashes the window and manages to escape, just like in the movie. But he doesn't even care about Dooku. In this timeline, since Dooku is unable to hold on to anything as space sucks the air from the bridge because he has no hands, Anakin holds him with the Force until the blast shielding comes into effect, causing all of them to fall to the floor. Anakin remarks to Dooku that his favorite commander was just as cowardly as all of the others that Anakin had battled over the course of the Clone Wars, in typical separatist fashion. This is when the Invisible Hand begins to break apart, and Anakin has to navigate the ship to the ground. He still takes out the control tower on approach, and Obi-Wan snidely remarks that they had made another happy landing. Dooku scoffs, saying that they really had so little regard for the lives of their citizens that they were joking immediately after killing a bunch of people in a crash landing by taking out that tower. This shuts the pair up, and Dooku shakes his head, stating that the Jedi truly had lost their way. As the trio are returning to the Senate, Anakin confides in Obi-Wan about how he had killed the Chancellor. Initially, Kenobi is shocked. However, after a moment, he admits that many within the Jedi Order were starting to have their doubts about Palpatine. Perhaps this message from the Force that Anakin had received had been indicative of something more. Dooku laughs at the two, and Obi-Wan gives him a sharp look. Dooku reminds Obi-Wan that he had quite literally laid out the entire plan of the Sith to among Geonosis at the beginning of the Clone Wars. And yet, even though Obi-Wan had told the Jedi Council about what Dooku had said, in their arrogance, they had refused to believe it. He says that they probably still won't, and that he also thinks that they will lead the Order into turning on Anakin, just like they had with his apprentice, Ahsoka Tano. Kenobi says that they would never, and Dooku simply shakes his head, Sad that such a remarkable man could have fallen prey to the dogmatic failures of the Jedi. Soon, Obi-Wan would see what Dooku and Qui-Gon did. The Dark Lord states that the Jedi were flawed. When Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Dooku inform the Jedi Council about what had happened on the Invisible Hand, the Council is greatly disturbed. Dooku verifies Anakin's claims, but there are many who don't believe the man who had betrayed their order and started a war against the galactic government that stood for many millennia. The Jedi, due to their allegiance to the Republic, decided it would be prudent to inform the Senate of what Anakin had done. Yoda believes Anakin, but many of the other members of the Council simply refuse to believe that they had had the wool pulled over their eyes for decades by the Chancellor. Mace Windu still refuses to trust the young Skywalker, and he believes that Dooku has corrupted Anakin and has told him to say these things to cover up for his secret separatist affiliations and a political killing of the Chancellor. Other, more dogmatic members of the Jedi Council agree with Mace, and they're totally split on what to do with the young Jedi Knight. Anakin, being the hothead that he is outraged that all of this service to the Republic had led to nothing, and that they still didn't believe him. He says that this is the exact same thing that they had done to his Padawan, Ahsoka, and he also says that he can now understand why his young apprentice had left the Jedi Order. The Jedi end up reporting what Anakin had told them to the Senate, and he is placed under arrest alongside Dooku. Dooku and Anakin are made cellmates. Anakin has many visitors, including from Rex, Obi-Wan, and representatives on behalf of Padme. They tell Anakin about what's going on in the galaxy, and they also tell him that Grievous has overtaken all military operations for the Confederacy. Many of the parliamentarians in the CIS are scared that Grievous will eliminate them if they go against his tactics or strategy, so they essentially let him do whatever he wants to. With Dooku and Sidious out of the picture, the only people who are able to keep the cybernetic madmen in check are members of the corporate council. According to Padme, following their meeting on Utapau, Grievous massacred everyone who was present when they tried to express their concern about his strategies and about their bottom line for whatever companies they represented. Grievous had stolen the identity of the Confederacy and ended up taking up the mantle of its champion while Dooku was in prison. The Mad General had the government under his thumb. When Dooku hears about this, he laughs, saying that he knew this would have happened upon the death of his master. Anakin had made the correct decision in killing the Dark Lord, but he had also unleashed another unhinged beast in the process. Hopefully, because of Grievous's lack of political savvy, he would be disposed of quickly. If Dooku couldn't lead the Confederacy to victory, due to his vindictive Sith nature, he hopes that nobody else can either. Soon, Anakin's trial begins. He is placed before the Senate on a military tribunal, and Tarkin presides over it as the prosecution, just like in the trial of Ahsoka Tano. Another officer who is far less experienced than Tarkin agrees to take the reins as Anakin's defense, and the interim chancellor, Mos Amida, seems set on finding answers for why Palpatine had died. Anakin admits that he killed the chancellor. However, he also argues that he was acting in the best interests of the Republic as a whole. Anakin says that Dooku could be his witness, and that Palpatine had told him to go against the Jedi Code for his own interests. Anakin says to the galaxy that they're blind if they cannot see his loyalty to the Republic. After all, he'd been serving them for years as a heroic general. Why would he suddenly just turn against the Republic that he had worked so hard to serve? Tarkin, on the other hand, counters by saying that Anakin is just another Jedi who had gotten too high on his haunches and thought that he could control the galaxy. After all, the Chancellor, even if he was a maniacal Sith, was still a democratically elected leader, right? How would that change his actions? Anakin had committed treason. Anakin's defense retorts by saying that if Dooku had been correct, and if he wasn't lying, then, in actuality, the Chancellor had been the traitorous one, not Anakin. The Senate, along with the courts, are shocked by these testimonies on the opening day of the trial. Holo News is all over the event, especially given the fact that Ahsoka Tano, Anakin's Padawan, had undergone the same process. Protesters in favor of Anakin's actions clashed with those who disagreed with him in front of the Senate building and the Jedi Temple. While the Republic continues to deal with Anakin's trial, the war still rages across the galaxy. The 501st are put under the command of Mace Windu, as he was on Coruscant at the time of Grievous's siege and Palpatine's death. Rex, while he's incredibly fond of Skywalker, continues to do his due diligence for the Republic. Many of his men, like Jesse and Vaughn, grumble, and they wish that Anakin was still their commander. They privately confide in Rex, telling him that they believe that Anakin was right, especially after the rumors had been circulating about what had happened to Top and Fives fairly recently. Rex is somber, telling them that he doesn't disagree. They also say that perhaps now, with the Chancellor gone, someone would actually listen to their concerns about Fives' discoveries. Rex tells them to hold out, and he says that he respects General Windu as a commander with his life. Grievous, who still has control of both the corporate council and the parliament in the Confederacy, decides to continue an offensive approach to the Republic. While it was likely that with Palpatine dead and the war having been drawn on for a very long time that the Republic would offer the Confederacy a peace deal, Grievous didn't care. Instead, he wants to inflict pain on the Republic and the Jedi, just like they had to his people during the beginning of the Clone Wars. He continues to launch massive droid strikes on key points of the Republic planets, and the Outer Rim sieges intensify. During this time, since the Confederacy now has no intention of surrendering, the Senate is forced to pour more money into their defense budget, especially since there is an immense distrust in Jedi leadership following Anakin's defeat of Palpatine. More civilian officers are hired to be military commanders under the oversight of Academy graduates like Tarkin, Yularen, and Pelion, and the Jedi slowly lose their control over the war. Even seasoned commanders, like Mace Windu, start to lose their grip on their troops, slowly finding their influence being placated by the new, junior civilian officers. This begins to anger some of the Jedi, including Mace, who loses his command, who, while they still are supporting the war effort through taking more of a soldier or political position in the conflict, believe that they should have more say in what happens. A sense of entitlement takes over a significant portion of the Jedi Order, and they believe that they would be better leaders than the politicians in the Senate. Yoda, seeing this growing discontent among the Jedi ranks, cautions their thoughts, telling them that they were servants of the Republic, not its commanders. Finally, the factor that tips the Republic over the edge into absolute chaos is Dooku's testimony in Anakin's trial. When Dooku, who now had nothing to lose, reveals to the galaxy that Palpatine had indeed been a treasonous puppet master who had started a crisis for his own homeworld to gain more power, and who had initiated the entire Clone Wars by playing both sides, the Senate is in shock. Once again, many senators don't believe Dooku, and the courts are unconvinced. They believe that Dooku is working with Anakin to try and destabilize the Republic, and they still see Palpatine as an effective wartime leader. Those who believe Anakin, like Bail, Padme, and Mon Mothma, believe that more digging should be done into figuring out how true this really was. They feel as though many of the battles that had been waged by Palpatine in recent times were strange, and that they had indeed been used to prolong the war. When they do some digging, evidence is furthered when discovering that Delta Squad and some of the Null Arcs during the events of the Republic Commando novels had found out that these giant droid armies massively outnumbered the Republic and could have easily squashed the clones through sheer force of numbers and sustainability. Now, with Grievous continuing to annihilate clones on the battlefield with increased production of battle droids and more ruthless tactics, the Republic was losing, and they were being punished by the cyborg general. This perhaps furthered the point that Palpatine had actually been playing both sides of the war to eventually gain more power for himself. Why else would he send Republic forces and Separatist forces to combat each other and have the Separatist forces, who could annihilate the Republic in an instant, like they were doing right now, to hold off? There was no real reason for it, and this starts to convince many of the senators who were under the impression that Anakin was a traitor to join their side. On the Jedi end of things, because of their continued loss of influence in galactic affairs, there are many who blame Yoda for their lack of foresight in seeing that Palpatine was a Sith Lord. Even close friends on the Council, like Mace Windu and Ki-Adi-Mundi, especially Mace because he is still frustrated with losing his command position just after he had obtained it, believe that perhaps it is time for new leadership in the Order. They don't fall into the dark side, but they legitimately believe that it's time for Yoda to be gone. In secret, a small contingent of Jedi vows that they will remove Yoda and all of Yoda's supporters from power, with force if required. At the next meeting of the Jedi Council, Windu subtly proposes that perhaps it is time for the Grand Master to retire peacefully, especially after the stress of the war. He also says that it seemed like Yoda had lost the loyalty of the troops, and that maybe if the Jedi Order had new leadership, they could get that back. Yoda, who doesn't react heavily, simply chuckles and says that he still believes he has some good to give to the Jedi. Because the Jedi Order had become so corrupt, and because it had lost its way, those who believe in the deposition of Yoda as the Grand Master ignite their sabers, and they're prepared for physical confrontation to challenge him. Windu says that Yoda's time at the helm of the Jedi Order had come to an end, and that it was time for a new direction. Yoda, ready to defend his honor and vision for the Order, ignites his lightsaber in turn, ready to defend himself. Obi-Wan looks on this in horror, his jaw dropping to the floor. Such an action from a leading member of the Council was unprecedented, and Obi-Wan sides with Yoda in hopes of preserving stability within the Jedi Order. A coup against Yoda had begun. Soon, the fate of both the Jedi Order and the galaxy would be decided. Lightsabers begin to clash vividly within the Jedi Council chambers. Yoda, not wanting to kill his Jedi peers, dances around them with his unique mastery of Form 4 Ataru lightsaber combat. Mace Windu, whose main weapon is his ability to use the pod against Darkseid users, is somewhat impeded, as Yoda has no Darkseid energy to use against him. However, he is still an incredibly competent duelist, and with some of the other Jedi Council members on his side, such as Ki-Adi-Mundi, Shakti, Aegon Caller, and Kit Fisto, he is able to, at the very least, manage Yoda. However, Plo Koon and Obi-Wan are also involved in this conflict. They each go on the defensive, not wanting to hurt their Jedi comrades. However, eventually it seems inevitable. Obi-Wan knocks Kit Fisto's lightsaber from his hands, and he force pushes him against the wall. Plo Koon struggles to take on multiple Jedi at once, and he ends up being subdued. However, he puts up a massive fight. Even Yoda, who in his old age is becoming more frail, is having a difficult time keeping up with his acrobatic lightsaber-wielding style, and he's starting to get tired. Frustration overtakes the Grandmaster, and for one brief moment, he's brought back to that vision of his dark side self that he had experienced during Season 6 of the Clone Wars. That dark, twisted smile looks back at Yoda in his mind's eye, and he understands that perhaps he was letting his feelings control him. After all, he had lost control of the troops. Under his leadership, Palpatine had been able to hide and thrive in the shadows before Anakin killed him. So, Yoda sighs for a moment, and he turns off his lightsaber. He motions for Kenobi to do the same. Yoda states that this entire conflict wasn't the way of the Jedi, and that he had let arrogance and frustration blind him for years. Anakin had made the correct decision, and he had defeated the threat that none of them had seen coming, even if some of the other Jedi refused to believe it. So, Yoda agrees that it's time for him to step down as Grand Master of the Order, and that he would go into relative retirement on the Jedi Temple on Tython. There, he would meditate for the rest of his days, and he would contemplate the nature of the Force, along with trying to reconcile the leadership during his final days. This is good enough for those who are fighting him, and they agree to Yoda's terms. It is time for the Jedi Order to move in another direction. After his departure, Yoda instructs the Council to make Obi-Wan the Grand Master in his stead. After all, he had been the most calm, measured, and reasonable of any of them during this conflict. However, when Yoda leaves, Mace Windu wants to punish Kenobi for siding with Yoda. So he kicks both him and Plo Koon off of the Council, something that makes Obi-Wan a little bit upset. Perhaps Anakin did have some points about the corruption of the Council. It seemed as though Windu had just seized power for himself, and that he intended to run the Order in the exact same way that it had been run for hundreds of years. Plo assures Obi-Wan that while this decision may have been frustrating, that surely the Force had new plans for them, and that everything would turn out for the better. Obi-Wan takes some solace in this, but he can't help thinking about how the Force seemed to always want to teach him too many lessons, especially with the recent death of Satine. Anakin's trial ends with quite the bang. The court rules Skywalker to be guilty of treason, and Anakin is taken aback. He's sentenced to a life in the highest security prison possible, alongside Dooku. However, when this is announced, Senator Amidala issues a proposal to the Senate that they vote to pardon Skywalker based on the information that had come forward about the inhibitor chips, the lack of offensives from the Confederacy, and the testimony from Dooku, which lined up with everything else that they had seen, and that many senators, despite initial apprehension, were now on board with. The Senate, overall, believing Anakin to be a devout protector of the Republic, following perhaps some shaken faith in him due to his heroic acts in the Clone Wars, votes in a majority to pardon him, especially after the strange inconsistencies of Palpatine's tenure as Chancellor that had been explored further during the trial. Tarkin, who was initially smug about Anakin's incarceration, is now infuriated, but he maintains a collected composure. Soon, he believes, the Senate would see the folly of their actions and of the Jedi as a whole. The Senate elects a new permanent chancellor to replace Amida. Mon Mothma, whose vision of pacifist peace and security for the Republic resonates with many after the brutal Clone Wars, is elected to be the new chancellor. She vows to quickly end the war and to allow for the Confederacy to secede. However, she knows that this will be impossible with Grievous heading their government. While Grievous is recovering after a campaign in the Outer Rim, taking shelter on Dooku's homeworld of Sereno, Delta Squad is sent in with Omega Squad and the Bad Batch to covertly take out the General. The Republic intelligence has been incredibly accurate as to the movements of Separatist leaders during the war, and this time was no exception. Grievous is killed by Special Ops, who managed to hide from the lightsaber-wielding maniac and shoot him in the heart, just like Kenobi had in the original timeline. Soon after, the Separatist Parliament agrees to a peace treaty with the Republic, and they are allowed to have their own self-governing society separate from Republic intervention. Following Anakin's trial, Dooku also accepts his fate. He's thrown in prison, and he's not given a lighter sentence, even though he helped uncover Palpatine's evil doings throughout the galaxy. He's content to know that the Confederacy had survived, and that his vision continued to live on within the galaxy. He also knows that he's old, so he wouldn't have much time left to live anyway. How do these events impact the end of our story? Let's find out. After Anakin sees once again how his order had failed to stick up for him during a time of danger, Anakin decides that this time he's leaving. Obi-Wan respects his decision, and so does Plo Koon, but the others frown upon him. Mace even says to him that as Grand Master, if he didn't choose to leave, Anakin would have been booted from the Order for his relationship with Padme, which had recently been uncovered, along with his actions against Palpatine. Rex, after the war concludes, also decides to leave the military. Both of them go to live on Naboo. Rex becomes Padme's chief of security, and Anakin lives a lovely life raising their children and teaching them about his thoughts on the Force. Obi-Wan, despite being cast aside by Mace, knows that he can continue to make the Order better. He waits for his turn, knowing that eventually someone would resign or pass into the Force, thus vacating a council position that he could fill. In the meantime, he reflects on what could be improved in the Order, and he notes it for later. Many years in the future, Obi-Wan is given a council spot, and he makes sure that his voice is heard. Yoda lives the rest of his days as a monk on Tython, studying the Force and teaching other travelers about his journey. Eventually, the little green man becomes one with the Force, having finally completed his training that Qui-Gon had given him all those years ago. The Confederacy and the Republic live harmoniously, and it seems as though things are going well for the galaxy. Mon Mothma dismisses many of the old military officials who had served in the war, such as Tarkin, and provides them with sizable pensions. She also introduces legislation that protects clones after the war, and she starts a Department of Veterans Affairs for those who are retiring. Dooku, after a couple of years in prison, passes away in his cell, but his legacy lives on. The Confederacy remains strong, and Dooku is satisfied that something good could come out of his life. The galaxy is at peace. Finally, everybody had a chance to breathe. Hello there, folks. I hope that you enjoyed today's What If scenario. If you did, I'd recommend checking out this other video, What If Obama was the champion of the Jedi Order? If you have any thoughts on our story, let us know in the comments. Would you like to see a part 2? If so, what do you think would happen next? Also, it would be great to see you join our growing community on Discord. We have a fantastic community of engaged fans such as yourself, and you might even see your ideas for videos or artwork pop up in the future. Have a bantatacular rest of your day, folks, and as always, I hope that you've had your delicious daily dose of Bantha Stew.